Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this year's Peace Address. In this event series, which now is its 8th year, the Peace Research Institute Oslo, PRIO, sets out to invite speakers from all over the globe and from a range of backgrounds, providing relevant insights and experiences to our field. My name is Henrik Urdal, and I have the great pleasure and privilege of being the director of this proud institution since the 1st of July this year. PRIO is nearing its 60th anniversary. Our institute was established first as a research program under the auspices of the Institute for Social Research in 1959. Already then, we operated in close connection with practice. Already then, the issues were tackled from different angles, micro and macro, by a range of academic disciplines and through various scientific approaches. Innovation and challenging established truths were the ideals. They still are. Through cutting-edge, independent and relevant research, PRIO strives for the ultimate vision of a world in which peace is the norm and conflict is the exception. The distinguished speakers invited to give the annual peace addresses are knowledgeable of aspects related to our mission. They are here to enlighten us, inspire us, challenge us, and hopefully not just PRIOites, but all of us. This year, we are exceptionally honored and pleased to have Obiageli Oby Ezekwesili as our distinguished keynote speaker. Oby is a Nigerian national, a chartered accountant by training. She holds degrees in international law and diplomacy as well as public administration. She's held 2 minister posts in the Nigerian government, including Minister of Education. And she was Vice President for Africa in the World Bank for 5 years. She founded Transparency International more than 20 years ago. And more recently, she is known to many of you as the initiator of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign following the abduction of more than 200 girls by Boko Haram in Nigeria. We have invited Oby Ezekwesili to talk about education and peace, both of which are positive value words, both of which are connected to sustainable development, and both of which, unfortunately, are all too frequently perceived in their negative form in the world as absent. They're also interconnected. Absence of peace often means absence of education. In my own research, I've looked at the reverse mechanism. What does the presence of education mean for the absence of conflict? And it is clear from the research that providing education is an important means to peace. The presence of even education, namely leveling inequalities in education, is another factor. Societies in which education is distributed unevenly, whether between men and women or between social groups, have an elevated risk of conflict. And finally, being educated to something is crucial. If large youth cohorts are educated to unemployment and to exclusion, this is not conducive to peace. Thus, the relationship between the two is complex and many-faceted. However, while there certainly are challenges, we also have to acknowledge and celebrate the progress and the victories, because that tells us that it is achievable to move the world we live in. Oby Ezekwesili has been invited to reflect, structured and disposed as she chooses, on the pathways to peace through education. The title of her talk is simply Education and Peace, and I look very much forward to hearing what she has to say and to our discussion afterwards with Laila Bukhari and Aslak Myhre. Last week, she was celebrated in Toronto as one of the 100 most important visionary thinkers in the world by the Albert Einstein Legacy Project. Next week, she is traveling to New York to discuss world development challenges with Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates. Today, she is topping her world tour as the keynote speaker at the PRIO Annual Peace Address. Obi, please.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, my dear Henry. What a delight to be in Oslo and amidst very diverse group of people that do very important work to help our world achieve exactly the kind of outcomes that we spend so much time imagining shouldn't be too difficult to attain with our collective capacities. I want to welcome you, the State Secretary, Laila, and I want to thank the leadership of the Institute for inviting me. I want to welcome all other guests that are here, and might shout out to my people from Nigeria, because I know there are a couple of them here in the room. As Henry said, I am speaking on education and peace. My husband accompanied me, and could you please help me acknowledge my husband, Pastor Chinedu. Pastor Chinedu Ezekwesili. I start by saying that a focus on education and peace needs to get us immediately thinking of the recent death of governments, and that in consonance with my training by my dad, I love him enormously. He's now late, but I always quote him, that anything without purpose should not exist. I have always been very unwavering in my stance that governments must function on the basis of the leitmotif for which they have been constructed as a concept in human society. And so I say that the raison d'etre of every government is to persistently raise the standard of living or quality of life of its citizens. The legitimacy that citizens confer on their nation state is linked to its capacity to do the things that improve their welfare. Successful countries are those that have developed and in so doing raised their citizens' quality of life over the decades of their existence. The more prosperous a country becomes, the more peaceful and stable it is, and the less probable that it would descend into conflict. All you need to do is to look at the fragility index, whether it's produced by Freedom House or any other of the groups that measure indicators of stability, prosperity, and a tendency toward conflict in order to establish the correlations and the causalities. This is why Singapore, for example, is often cited as a model of some sort among countries like my country, Nigeria, with which it gained independence from the same country, which shall remain nameless, in the 60s. As you know already, whereas Singapore has managed to harness its governance capabilities to produce an impressive nearly $60,000 annual income per capita for her citizens by 2014, my country, Nigeria, produces GDP per capita of about $2,500. The difference in these outcomes is made even more stark by the fact that at the beginning of Singapore's journey to national development, as well as my country's journey to national development, the income per capita of both countries were very close. Whereas the income per capita was about $300 for Singapore in those early 60s, it was about $100 for Nigeria. Considering Nigeria's enormous natural and human endowment, it is evident that our own country failed to transform potentials to development and stability. There are a myriad of factors for the gap in Nigeria's development process and the outcome it has generated. However, the challenges of leadership and checkered history or record of governance are more widely adduced as reasons for my country's poor performance. In the 1960s, the bet was on Nigeria. The bet was that Nigeria would climb the development ladder faster than countries like Singapore. At a macro level, there were many studies and rankings that attribute better quality leadership and governance of Singapore to its fast climb from third world to first. At the micro level, however, the deep disparity accorded to the development of human capabilities of citizens explains much of the monumental gap in progress between the two countries. Simply put, Singapore did well to have adopted and focused on a human development-led economic strategy. Nigeria, conversely, stunted its progress when it became diverted by the enormous oil resources, leading to the resource curse that afflicts most commodities-rich countries. I'm speaking to a very highly enlightened audience, so I'm sure you can relate to this. Nigeria today faces existential threats arising from multidimensional tensions between and among its people. It is the result of what I recently called the economics of failure. The tensions and conflicts that are traceable to the fact that the country has not managed to produce sufficient economic prosperity for its people because the political class has given more attention to the politics of rent-seeking from oil than building equitable society. A more prosperous Nigeria that is inclusive will more likely be a stable Nigeria with minimal points of brittleness among its diverse people. As a matter of fact, some of the research that comes out on diversity shows that the more diverse a society is, the higher the probability that it would produce great outcomes, because innovation is a factor of diversity. Unfortunately, the presence of oil has robbed my society of that incredible opportunity of focusing on what our citizens can produce. My evidence-based assertion, therefore, is that it will take a changeover by Nigeria to human capital-based economic development strategy for us to build a prosperous country. That's how important education is for me. So what exactly do I mean by human capital-centered economic development strategy? Well, for me, it's pretty simple. It is the one that places the citizen and their empowered capacities at the center of economic policies, ensuring that from cradle to career, each citizen is accorded more premium than oil, copper, gold. My South African sisters are here, shout out to them. To anything that is natural resources. It is a development strategy that recognizes that Africa's greatest constraint to equitable, inclusive, broad-based, and shared growth is primarily the low productivity of African citizens and the poor competitiveness of our respective countries. The causality that exists between natural resources, the absence of education, and conflict is an interesting one. Societies with plenty of natural resources tend to be hijacked by a few, who then create a context for rent that strangulates the rest. The theory of human capital may have its limitations and criticisms, but economic evidence throughout history has shown that nations which invested in and empowered their citizens as a matter of deliberate economic policies have performed better than those which approached development differently. And ladies and gentlemen, I am bold to say it because data justifies it, that education is the new economy. These days, more than any other time in history, the economic health of a country depends on the skills, the knowledge, the capacities of the people of that country, but not just economics, because many studies have shown that overall stability, prosperity, and progress of any country can be determined by how inclusively it runs itself. Education has proven itself to be the bedrock of human progress. It improves the status of citizens of any society, providing each individual with the capacity to function and contribute to economic development with intergenerational benefits that stabilize the future. So the knowledge that we may not belong to the class that we aspire to, but we certainly will ultimately get there as generations access opportunities for education, stabilizes society. Ladies and gentlemen, human development progress is a key feature of stable societies. Little wonder that countries with low human development indicators tend to be more brittle and prone to conflict. The lower the human development score of society, the higher the level of poverty, and in a viciously cyclical way, widespread poverty becomes a causative factor itself for lower human development and a trigger of conflict and insecurity of all types. Nigeria does poorly in terms of education and health of the majority of our population. But even more problematic is that we are still behind the curve in terms of parity between girls and boys in school. And, I stopped to acknowledge Leila because I was quite enthused to learn of your special focus on girls' education. That's the way to go. Because the disparity can be harmful to any society. Gone are the days when we say we educate women to be nice to them. No, you educate women to be nice to yourself. A World Bank study found that primary education increases girls' earnings by 5 to 15% over their lifetime. Parity is key to leveraging inequality and developing a female base of the population that is capable of positively influencing better intergenerational outcomes to secure the future. So until equal number of girls and boys, and therefore all children of both genders that should be in school are in school, it will be impossible to build the knowledge necessary to eradicate poverty and hunger, to combat diseases, and to ensure environmental sustainability. Without all of this, it is impossible to secure the future, because the present is not even assured. For a secure future, it is extremely important that girls have access to education. For every additional year girls go to school, they receive 20% higher wages and suffer 10% fewer child deaths. Women with some formal education are more likely to seek medical care, ensure their children are immunized, be better informed about their children's nutritional requirements, and adopt improved sanitation practices. As a result, their infants and children have higher survival rates and tend to be healthier and better nourished. Now, being better nourished is a factor in learning outcomes. So you want to get good education outcomes? Nutrition is part of it. For children to be well nourished, educate their mothers. That's why at the World Bank we always said that educating the girl child is simply smart investment. According to the International Center for Research on Women, the education that a girl receives is the strongest predictor of the age at which she will marry, and is a critical factor in reducing the prevalence of child marriage. The World Bank estimates that an additional year of schooling for 1,000 women helps prevent 2 maternal deaths. Also, each additional year of formal education that a mother completes translates to her children staying in school an additional 1/3 to 1/2 of a year. These indicators are important because an evidence-based approach at persuading people on the necessity for education and the development of human capital to be the primary agenda of all in any society is central to securing the future. So, not just the girl child, but the entire society wins in a nation that empowers her. Attempting to further scrutinize the divergence in the economic performance of Singapore and Nigeria, I read up on a recent poll by Mastercard Index of Women's Achievement, which studied the socioeconomic understanding or the socioeconomic standing of women using 3 yardsticks. The metrics it measured were capability, employment, and leadership. The scores of Singapore compared to its neighboring countries, and it makes so much sense that Singapore is reaping the benefits of empowering the girl child. The capability component of that poll compared the rates of male and female enrollment in secondary and tertiary institutions. Singapore earned 97.9 points, reflecting near gender parity in education. The employment criterion compared the rates of workforce participation and regular employment among men and women, Singapore was ranked 7th. Although only 74.3 women are in the workforce for every 100 men, women are more likely than men to be in regular employment, with 109.8 women for every 100 men in a regular job. The leadership component measured the ratio of women to men in business ownership and leadership, as well as political participation. Singapore was placed 3rd in this category overall, and first among developed Asian markets that also included Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. So what do I say to all of this? There is clearly something about achieving gender equality in terms of opportunities. And the greatest leveler is education. There is clearly a value-based case for gender equality. Women are 1/2 of the world's population, like some of you didn't know that already. And they deserve equal access to health, education, economic participation, and earning potentials, as well as political decision-making power. Since the population of each country is made up of males and females, and the number can therefore matter, it is only those countries that invest in and utilize both sexes in their development process that can quicker attain their development objectives. By helping each citizen, male and female, to acquire these human assets of skills, knowledge, and capacities, a society secures itself and guarantees a stable future. Deliberate policies of inclusion and equity are not only important to achieve gender parity, but to effectively manage other aspects of diversity in any society. That Nigeria is a country of diverse ethnic, cultural, religious, and social groupings makes education even more potent a weapon for our nation building. A country remains a mere geographical entity until those that inhabit that entity share common values, have shared vision, and commit to a common identity as nation-building formations. An intentional strategy in nation-building process internalizes equality of opportunity and integrates it into policies, into scarce resources prioritization, and into institutions building in a way that ensures that no group is left behind. Although outcomes will seldom be equal in diverse societies, the effort at ensuring that everyone, regardless of their ethnicity, their religion, their culture, their beliefs, and all these other primordial factors, has access to education reduces tension. Henry was just talking about that. The reality, however, is not always as desired. And a classic example of that is my country, Nigeria. A recent study by United States Agency for International Development, which was work that my dear friend Henry and a colleague here at PRIO, Gudrun Ospik. Did I get that right? Can't stand it when people murder my name. So I try not to murder other people's names. That study is quite revealing. It found, for example, that a wide gap exists in girls' education across ethnic groups. According to the conflict and inequality evidence from 30 countries of sub-Saharan Africa, among Hausas, the largest ethnic group in Nigeria, women have on average 1.6 years of schooling, as compared to the Yoruba woman, who on average has more than 9 years of schooling. I know that. I was Minister of Education. A similar disparity exists for Nigeria's other larger ethnic groups. Igbo women also have, on average, more than 9 years of schooling, while Fulani women have, on average, only 0.8 years, less than 1 year of schooling. The impact of conflict in the 3 states of the northeast region of my country, where the Boko Haram activities are dominant, is certain to widen the education attainment gap between these ethnic groups. In such circumstances, poor education attainment can be a factor in higher propensity for conflict, and conflict worsens attainment in what becomes an intractable and vicious cycle. According to UNESCO, many of the out-of-school children are in conflict zones of the world. The Nigerian states of Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe are examples of this nexus between conflict and education. Innovation is important. When we're in a fix. We are in a fix means we've got to figure a way to get out of the fix. And all the solutions we know have not taken us out of the fix. Therefore, it has to be through innovation that we break out from that which seems unattainable. So, innovative ways of delivering education in such conflict-affected places has become part of the wider peace-building agenda of governments and the international community, many of whom are represented here today. And I really want to thank those of you that work in conflict-affected areas. We need more people, because the resilience of societies is under attack. We need to know that our new normal is that there would be conflicts, but we cannot possibly not have people who would be ready to go and get work done. We must build resilient societies. And it takes people who are committed to build such societies. If one major way out of conflict is to give the aggrieved a stake in society that they have taken up arms against, I'll take that again. If one major way out of conflict is to give the aggrieved a stake in the society that they have taken up arms against, then ensuring that all conflict-affected areas are given special focus in the design of national education strategy is key to nation building. It simply cannot wait. We can't wait until the conflict is over in order to educate people. Education is part of ending all conflicts. The role of education of girls in conflict-affected areas is clarified in a recent United Nations Children Fund case studies of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. According to the report, The findings demonstrated that the school system has the potential to positively affect the attitudes and behavior of teachers and students, even in conflict settings. And this includes influencing gender roles and responsibilities. Even then, the study is emphatic in stating that the impact of the education acquired within the school setting by girls had no appreciable effect on the attitudes in the wider community. So it's a limited number in the school system. Imagine what happens if we broadened the base of the people that in the school system changed their attitudes. The most interesting part of the conclusions of the case studies is that education, both in school and informal, has a wide range of roles to play in influencing gender norms, providing information, generating debates, and importantly, using the power of educational institutions as frameworks to bring people together to decide how to change, model different behaviors, and thus proactively set trends for transformation. When things like this happen, there is common understanding. There's less opportunity for disagreements to get to the point where they cannot be resolved, which is what usually happens. Being more preventive of conflict is more important to us as a development community than acting after conflict has commenced. The extent to which these roles can be harnessed to contribute meaningfully to social cohesion is dependent upon school-focused initiatives being conducted in concert with broader efforts to engage the wider community. End of quote. A nation-building strategy that emphasizes education of Nigeria's diverse population and participation of all, irrespective of their region, their religion, their culture, their tongue, would evidently achieve national cohesion. During my time in office as Minister of Education, we shaped an education vision and we built it around values. We said that our education vision was to nurture the mind, create a good society that competes globally. We used analytical and empirical data to identify gaps across the regions, across the ethnic groups, and the religious groupings. Unfortunately, that education reform was politicized after my time in office, and the successor administrations simply abandoned. It's all part of the conversation. How do we build systems that continue to stay with solutions, regardless of the political persuasion of those that run the administration of nations? When government fail to live up to their responsibility persistently, the Fragile States Index classifies them as fragile states. Some of the features of a fragile state, according to this index, is that, number one, the central government is so weak and ineffective that it has little practical control over much of its territory. That's what the northeast of Nigeria has descended into. There is non-provision of public services, second. Third, there's widespread corruption and criminality. You know, we deal with these challenges in my society. 4, there is refugees and involuntary movement of populations. There are a couple of you I already spoke to that have one responsibility or the other working on humanitarian efforts in the Northeast or such other places. And number 5 is there is sharp economic decline. And you know what that means for fragility. At a score of 101.3, Nigeria is number 13 on the 2017 list of fragile states. Why should my country make such a list in the first place? Why? Poor development outcomes will take you to the wrong neighborhood. Whenever I am asked what the 2 most important issues are that Nigeria must address in order to assure its progress, I respond: productivity and competitiveness. They are intertwined. The more productive an economy becomes, the more probable that it can be competitive in the things that it does better than others. The most important determinant of a country's competitiveness is its human talent, the skills and the productivity of its workforce, men and women alike. The fastest route, therefore, for Nigeria to work its way out of the top of the fragility ranking is to address inequality and its root cause, which can directly be traced to unequal access to education by all. When it happens with girls, it is worse because it has a double effect. The girls which are not educated are most sooner exposed to child marriage, unprepared to raise children themselves, being children. Hence, society multiplies the number of individuals without the skills to lead a good life each time a girl child falls through the cracks of an unconcerned society and world. Why should you and I be in a world that allows that to happen? I always challenge myself with these questions, because then it sort of builds my spirit of irrepressibility to upset as many people as I can upset in the bid of forcing the kinds of things that we must do. Because I have found that every time we're complacent with the present, we don't create a good future. We shouldn't be. None of us should be comfortable in a society, in a world where inequality is deepening. We must challenge the world that we're in today. It's not a good world. It's not. It has all the great things that has happened. The greatest progress in human history has happened in the course of this past century and now. Capitalism has produced enormous wealth. We're much better than the people that lived in the other centuries. And yet, alongside all that has been created, we have more than the bottom billion that watches on as the rest of us carry on as though everybody had a cheesecake for dessert. Nigeria is an example of how only such expanded definition, I was going to say that in today's world of multiple threats, security has rightly been expanded beyond the militaristic sense of the word to new concept of human security. A secure society is therefore one in which national security is a composite of elements that in the past were treated in silos and never found deliberate convergence. For many countries, any talk about security now includes not just military, but also of the nation's values, its interests, and the freedom of citizens across the dimensions of politics, economy, and society. Nigeria is a good example of how only such expanded definition of security can help defeat terrorism and rebuild lives and communities. At the heart of the rebuilding is education, which today is endangered by the savagery of the forces of terror, to whom education is abominable. We cannot, however, allow forces of darkness, forces of extremism, to redefine our civilization. It's totally unacceptable. Our human civilization has always been built on the foundation of knowledge. Our civilization of the 21st century, of the fourth industrial revolution, of the machine age, the second machine age, our civilization of the era of artificial intelligence, of big data, of the robotics, of the Internet of Things, of blockchain technology, of simulation science, cannot be a world in which we have bottomless number of children without access to quality education. It cannot be. It's totally not acceptable. If you are not upset about it, I am on your behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, as the world enters an entirely new economic state, powered by all of these new ideas and knowledge, the profoundness of it, the height, the depth, the breadth of knowledge that will be unleashed on humanity requires that we should enable as many people as possible participate. That is the guarantor of peace. Such civilization places dignity on every human life. A country that values the life of each citizen will not constantly be careless with the loss of one. All through our history, Nigeria has almost become inured to the loss of life. There's been massive loss of life in my country. The Nigerian Civil War, known as the Biafran War. Millions of lives were lost. Loss of lives in the Niger Delta belt of our country, where most of the oil is explored. Lives lost in all kinds of upheavals in the western part of my country. Lives lost in the north central as a result of killings. Lives lost in the northeast tragedy of Boko Haram. In fact, there is more concern shown to the safety of oil pipelines than shown to the Nigerian life. It's an abomination. Shouldn't be. Ladies and gentlemen, that kind of aberration is why Nigerians must have a national conversation to forge a new consensus. But it must be a dialogue that does away with the obsession on politics and political structures that have never delivered anything but dismal outcomes to the majority that have already been left behind. It is not the kind of conversation amongst our privileged elite who have perfected the art of enriching themselves as a minority elite class, manipulating the dialogues of the past to no good outcome. The dialogue that Nigerians need today should be one centered on how to achieve economic prosperity, peace, and stability. Such a dialogue will help forge a basic building block of consensus that our citizens are the premium assets of our country. Not oil, not gas, not solid minerals, not agriculture. Our citizens. The corollary consensus is an economic philosophy that considers educated citizenry as the cornerstone of our development. Building from here, an economic model that is human capital centered will emerge. Then oil will lose its relevance to us even before the rest of the world tell us they don't need our oil. Because that's coming very soon. That's coming very soon. Were this to ever happen, Nigeria will fundamentally and structurally change because the consensus becomes our new social contract between the nation state and our citizens. Such a new social contract would mean prioritizing the range of education, health investments that we require in order to produce world-class human capital that can compete with the rest of the world. My greatest joy is usually when I meet people from abroad and they say to me, I had a Nigerian classmate, he was fantastic, or she was brilliant. We have them spread across the world. We need to produce hundreds of millions of them, with 50% of them as women, if not 60. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that any attempt at getting our consensus for nation building has to be one that is a game changer. It must be one that gives us the shared vision, framed in a way that the minimum that education should produce in every citizen is agreed. Because different education attainment can also be factors in inequality. It's not simply to go through the school. It's about the attainment. So for me, it would be to state that each of our citizens should be capable of cognitive, mental, affective, and motor skills and proficiency that is needed to be a contributor to our economic, social, and political development. The mantra of the Nigerian state would be to, at all times, strategically deploy education in Nigeria to ensure that we nurture the mind, create a good society that competes globally. Any attempt to equate citizens to boys and men while excluding girls and women will cost us the great future that Nigeria seeks. We could have already become a great nation had we placed the girl child at the center of our development agenda and process. Were we to have already done so, showing empathy for and upholding the dignity of the human life of our 219 Chibok girls and other citizens of abduction would have been spontaneous across our governing elite group, regardless of their political persuasion. But that was not so. Human lives, not the least of them, of girls and women, have no effect on the oil rent. And it is for the competition of this rent that our political class exists. Today, we still have 113 of the 219 Chibok girls that were forcefully taken from their classroom on the 14th of April 2014 with their captors. The terrorists who say that education is anathema have dared to successfully say to the world, what can you do? This girl's aspiration to become can be terminated by our power to subvert. And the world watches on. How can that be acceptable? How can we explain it? The denial indifference, and tentativeness that 2 consecutive administrations have shown to the rescue of the girls who went to school clearly links girls' education, terrorism, and good governance, or the lack of it. Thankfully, our movement, Bring Back Our Girls, stands firmly committed to making sure that our remaining 113 Chibok girls, as well as other abducted citizens that we are aware of, are not forgotten and abandoned. Our advocacy for government to give justice of rescue to victims of abduction has been long and tortuous. Oh, I bear stripes on my back for this advocacy. But our determination to persist is firmly rooted. The current Nigerian government policy and program of de-radicalization as a strategy of rebuilding peaceful communities cannot be successfully a solution in the long term without it being founded on effectively designed large-scale interventions to boost the number of girls in school in the northern part of my country. The fiscal implications of such bold program often appear daunting, but there are several proofs that it can be done. What would it take to massively improve girls' access to education? According to UNICEF, experience in scores of countries shows the importance, among other things, of 1, parental and community involvement. We all are family. Hillary Clinton said it takes a village. Families and communities must be important partners with schools in developing curriculum and managing children's education. 2, low cost and flexible timetables. Basic education should be free or cost very little. The issue of the way to share the cost in education is so relevant and a topic, not just in my country, but even in advanced societies now. How will we share the cost of education? But with basic education being so important that we should make it free for children, because that's where most of the children of the poor begin to determine whether they would make progress in life. Number 3, schools close to home with women teachers end up attracting more girls into the school system. Number 4, preparation for school. When girls are prepared, when they receive early child care, it enhances their self-esteem and prepares them for school. And number 5, the relevant curricula. Learning materials that are relevant to the girls' background and in their local language help enormously. I shall be winding this up now by saying that the World Bank, one of the last work that I was part of at the bank before I left, was our World Development Report on gender equality. And that report concluded that economic development is not enough to shrink all gender disparities, but corrective policies that focus on persisting gender gaps are essential. The report pointed out 4 priority areas for corrective policies going forward. First, reduce gender gaps in human capital, specifically those that address female mortality and education. Second, close gender gaps in access to economic opportunities. So while we're putting the girl child into school, we must make sure that the ones who are women are sharpened to be able to participate in economic production in their society. And third, we need to shrink gender disparities in voice and agency within society. And finally, 4, limit the reproduction of gender inequalities across generations. I'm always very strong in making the point that we must disrupt the intergenerational dynasties of poverty, where the great-grandmother was poor, the grandmother was poor, mother is poor, and daughter will potentially be poor. It's not an acceptable dynasty. That fourth point holds the key to all the other points. If our nation can act wisely starting from today, including South Africa, including any other country that's represented here today, this is not just a Nigerian story. If we can act wisely starting from today, then today's girl child will become tomorrow's woman. For every girl child, the future starts today. Empower the girl child, for in her lies every society's greatness. It is the reason that all of us, governments, business, citizens, think tanks, PRIO, academia, development partners, communities, families, individuals, must declare the battle line for the protection and education of girls in our societies. Above everything that others can do to support Nigeria's or Africa's quest to educate its girls and empower its women is what its own citizens can do. When citizens are informed, engaged, and act domestically to change the state of things, the results are more lasting and sustainable. Civil society in Nigeria can therefore begin to mobilize our public to collectively make a demand for a new social contract. Such a demand will be directed to the governing and wider political elite, extracting a commitment to respect and to dignify the human life in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, such new social contract will help ensure that governments can never again be lackadaisical in taking prompt and effective action when any of our citizens are in harm's way. They would also commit to not being factors in the breakdown of stability in our society. Malala Yousafzai, the young advocate and Nobel Prize winner for girls' education, said, "Terrorists have shown what frightens them the most. It is a girl with a book." As simple as this sounds, it suggests that for us to have peace, the world must prepare for war. The wisdom in Malala's statement is that there is a better strategy. Is it me? Okay. The wisdom in Malala's statement is that there is a better strategy for defeating extremism than militaristic war. Get all girls educated and frighten the hell out of extremists. We can therefore assert that educated girls and women are the world's best guarantors of peace, stability, and prosperity. The future of a prosperous and stable Nigeria, nay, the world, is female. I don't think the men heard that, so I'm going to repeat it. The future of a prosperous and stable Nigeria, stable South Africa, stable Botswana, stable Rwanda, stable Burkina Faso, stable Norway is female. future, however, begins today with our collective and effective investment of our time, our talent, our treasure in guaranteeing the education of all girls around the world. Like Hillary Clinton said, I believe that the rights of girls and women are the unfinished business of the 21st century. Education is indeed the vaccine for violence and the antidote that can usher in equality of opportunity to build a peaceful and prosperous life for everyone, women and men, boys and girls, no one excluded, everyone included. Welcome to the future today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oby, for an inspired, well-documented, and extremely powerful lecture. We will be hearing more from you. I will give you a little bit of a break, but we do have a second artistic performance for tonight. And I am sorry that now it's going to be my turn to butcher your language, because this is a song that the Norwegian Girls Choir has rehearsed. It's a Nigerian song in honor of you, and it's called Amu Woro Ai Utu Nwa, I believe. And it's a hymn in Igbo, one of the major languages, and I believe your mother tongue. So please welcome back the Norwegian Girls Choir and Anne Kagen Sundal Ask. Thank you again to the Norwegian Girls Choir. Now we're venturing into the discussion, and I invite our panelists excuse me, to take their places at the stage. And first I would like to introduce to you Laila Bokhari, who is State Secretary to the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, representing the Conservative Party, Høyre. Across the political divides in Norway, though, commitments, both to support global education and to prevent armed conflict, are key pillars of Norwegian international engagement. Beyond her professional role, which allows her to actually contribute to mend the world, Laila is also particularly competent and a competent voice in this debate, both with her background as a researcher on political extremism and violence, but also as leading a foundation running the Laila and Ammar School and College for Girls, providing education ranging from preschool to high school to more than 700 girls in Sultanabad in Pakistan. Welcome, Laila. Next, I would like to introduce Aslak Sira Myhre, our moderator for the evening. To the Norwegians among us, he is a strong public voice. He was the leader of the political party, Rødt, around the turn of the millennium. Since then, he has headed an organization called Les, Read, as it were. He was the executive director of the culture and event scene called House of Literature in Norway, and developed that to become a strong center point for public debate. And he is currently the Director General of the National Library. Aslak, I know that we are in able hands, please.
Welcome back, Oby.
Thank you.
And thank you for your fantastic address. I will try to call you Oby if that's okay.
Yes, that's what they can work on.
But for you non-Nigerians in the room, Oby has, as she told us, and we will find all over the internet, been known as under a different name for a long time since he was in government, which is the name of Madame Due Process.
Oh, wow.
And believe me, in Nigeria, due process is, and be Madame Due Process is not necessarily popular amongst all the people in the process. And that is one of the great achievements of Oby's political career. I want to start this conversation by asking Henrik and Laila to comment shortly on the address just made. I think we all agreed to what you said, but there are different perspectives to it. And Henrik, first you have yourself been researching gender, education, conflict, and differences in this. And I wonder, from your perspective as a researcher, what do you agree to Oby's perspective that the girl child is the solution, but also what kind of causalities do you see between education, conflict, and prosperity?
You said shortly?
Very shortly.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll sort of address one of the issues in that conundrum of issues, and I certainly do agree that we are seeing the importance of leveling education both between groups and between men and women as something that is contributing systemically to building peace. I would like to pick up on one of the issues which you addressed very well, I think, in your presentation, namely the issue of systematic inequalities. And I think you are right in the sense that we cannot, I mean, there will always be some level of differences in outcomes. We cannot assume and expect that everything is going to be equal. But we are very far from a situation like that. And the study that you referred to, which we did for the USAID back in 2014, was kind of a wake-up to us as well. The addressing of systematic inequalities is rarely something that is coming from governments themselves. They are not. Most governments are not really interested in sort of portraying the systematic differences in their own countries. I believe your government is a rare bird in that sense. Obviously, these are politically sensitive issues, and I don't always believe that that sort of donor countries are necessarily helping in exploring and also contributing to address these systematic inequalities. Secondly, we need to have the data in order to address these issues. If we don't have the data, we don't know if we are succeeding in reducing this. We are not currently tracking systematic differences in a systematic way. We have been using the data from the Demographic Health Service in the report that we did for USAID, covering 30 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But there needs to be sort of a more systematic tracking of that kind of inequalities. And finally, what we have found now in a recent study by the World Bank, I mean, the expectation is that many of these differences are extremely sticky, that it's difficult to do something about them. What we've found in the recent report that we did for the World Bank is quite to the contrary. In many, many contexts, it is actually possible to do something about this. We are seeing that systematic inequalities, if we look between the largest groups in societies, are on average going down. It doesn't mean that it's happening everywhere. There are certainly huge areas where we still need to work to address and reduce inequalities, but it is certainly possible to do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. And Laila, before we invite Oby back, Oby talks from a Nigerian perspective, but also on an international level. You are here both as a representative of the Norwegian government, but also with a personal investment in the same issue as Oby is addressing, the education of girls in Pakistan. And do you think, as you see this, the education of girls and development of countries, is the issue the same in Nigeria, Pakistan, all over the world? Could you comment a bit on that? And secondly, if you have the time, could you say something about the Norwegian government's position on this, which you also represent?
Sure. All in very short, very briefly.
Always short. Always short.
Oby, let me just, if I may, Oby, Madam Oby, let me just first of all thank you for such a passionate and powerful speech. Straight to many of our hearts, I'm sure. Most certainly straight to my heart. And what, one thing is standing there and saying the obvious, the no-brainer, if you like, what is right and what should be the smart thing. But actually adding on statistics and knowledge to that, and to many in this room and others, bringing out the indicators, the statistics is what has been missing for such a long time. The Norwegian government commissioned a report, an international report on the financing of education in 2015, and the result of that, the commission was led by Gordon Brown, and the result of that showed, that the cost of non-action is so much larger than the cost of doing something now, today, yesterday, preferably. But and reading that black on white is a refreshment. And then the second, so one thing is, you need those statistics, you need the knowledge and the experience on that. And secondly, what you also show from your experience, and unfortunately I didn't know you as a Minister of Education, but I'm sure you took on that role then as well, the leadership. The leadership, because this is about priorities. And I often say it's not, without underestimating the role of the Minister of Education, it should be the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, who should be saying exactly what you say. Unfortunately, I think in this country we've seen a Prime Minister who's very vocally and passionately put education on the board. And I've been with her in meetings where she, whoever she meets, she'll push this agenda forward. And yes, there are differences. There are differences in the level of education around the world. We see that. But the more you can continue to say this message to leaders and leadership, whether it's at the multilateral level or in bilateral settings, it can never be said too often, I think, But from that, you need practical steps, strategies from that, and each country can come up with that on its own. Each country is different. You asked me to compare Nigeria and Pakistan, very different countries. Different resources, different levels. One thing that might be equal to both countries is the presence of conflict in certain parts of the country, which northeast Nigeria and certain parts of Pakistan as well. And one of the things I always say is that the risk of losing a generation in conflict is so important not to do. That's why humanitarian assistance to education is maybe priority one. It should be a priority one. Making sure that even if your country ends up in conflict, if you have refugee situations, etc., make sure that education becomes part of it, because especially when you see protracted conflicts, like you see in a number of more and more number of countries now, making sure that education becomes part of the solution from day one of a conflict is so essential. Making sure that's part of it. Yeah, sorry.
But because I want to give the word back to you, Obi, but I read some of Henrik's research and other research that's been done now on the question of conflict in education. And seemingly, it's obvious that education can prevent conflict, but conflict doesn't necessarily mean that you get a lack of education. That might be different reasons for this, one of them being that NGOs, governments, aid organizations have their focus on the places where there are conflicts and actually do what Laila asks them to do, to see to that people get this education. There could be other variables as well. But some other numbers, Obi, that show that in Nigeria, within ethnic groups, the differences, as you mentioned, between Igbo, Yoruba girls and Hausa and Fulani girls are vast. We're talking enormous differences in education for girls and for boys as well, I would guess, but that's up to you to tell us. And I'm wondering, if conflict isn't the main factor causing this difference, what are the factors that causes this kind of inequality within a country as Nigeria?
So, am I on? Yes. So, some of the factors are cultural, some are religious, some are economic. I should use this. Are you going to put this up?
It's going to turn.
So some of the factors are cultural, religious, economic. Some are even political, and then some at the individual level. But one of the things that we found is that there is absolutely none of these barriers that cannot be overcome. And so different policy tools can address each of those barriers. If you know the south of Nigeria and the north of Nigeria well, you would know that the cultural and the social and the religious issues are quite wide and very different. But in all of what we see as barriers, we also see progress. Many more girls that have been able to access education are becoming role models in the North. And that's important for improving the possibility that parents would send their girl child to school. We also know that as you see the tension between the different ethnic groups, and Henry's point as well as Leila's point about data begin to prove certain things. So politically, people are understanding that there are real issues of not sending people to school. And so the evidence-based policy approach is huge and critical for shaping the public debate on the kinds of conversation that we're having, and that the systemic inequalities don't have to lead to conflict. They can actually be addressed through policy. And being able to have a conversation in terms of the governance of education in political configurations of countries. In our country, basic education and secondary education is the it's really the concurrent list, although, it should be the list of states alone. But because of some special intervention that government did through a few of the national unity schools, as we call them, so government has some secondary schools, but otherwise, basic education, secondary education is a state level activity. And that has also presented its challenge because you have some states where the political leaders just don't care about improving education. And yet they have to compete with the rest of the country. So there are issues of what kind of decentralization do you need for education in federal systems like ours? And how do you build mechanisms to ensure that equilibration of access to education? One of the things that we had during the time that I was Minister of Education was a federal level intervention into basic and secondary education so that the federal level could intervene and provide grants to almost as an incentive to make more states give more interest and more attention to basic education and to secondary education, so that in all, if you looked at all of these barriers, it's a matter of the will to remove them. There is no constraint to inequality of access to education that we no longer have a solution for. It's across the world. These problems have been solved, whether it's the economic one. We have, so when countries have designed conditional cash transfers and as a way of addressing the issues of access to money, as a factor for keeping girls away from school. We know it works. We know the result it produces. Whether it is in terms of the cultural barriers, the fact that we can have policy directions with leaders at the community level, and that we can tie community development opportunities to sending girls to school. We know it works. Whether it is, in terms of the religious, where we're getting people who are religious leaders to be the champions for education, we know it works. So whether it's at the individual level, getting people preschool opportunities and such kind of social interactions that then begin to make education interesting for them, or whether even it is in terms of the infrastructure for girls to make sure that some of those issues that arise that have cultural or religious implications and keep people from sending their children to school. We know they work. So the world knows the solution. We know the solutions. The issue is who are the ones that are prepared to lead in ensuring that all these solutions are put together and deployed to effective use at each time. And this is my opportunity to actually acknowledge the government of Norway, for what it tries to do internationally. I know that Norway has led quite a number of effort in the development environment within which I operate, whether it's in terms of your humanitarian interventions or it's in terms of the other work that I have done in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or whether it's in terms of, being an example in oil for development and some of the systems that you've managed to build, or even in the field of education and some of the things you've done. Transparency is a continuing agenda for the world. We know that services like education and health, which matter to the bottom billion, are where you find a lot of corruption that happens. So we as a global community must push the agenda on transparency. But the thing is, I always advise even countries like yours to not rest on your oars. because you can just become so complacent about fighting corruption even domestically, and then your institutions begin to accommodate certain kinds of misconduct that shouldn't ever be seen amongst you. So continue to be the country that we can hold up and say you are the top of some of these global rankings. Let leadership go toward more transparency. There can never be too much transparency in any society.
Laila.
There are so many issues to pick up on. I really don't know where to start, but I'd like to, because in many ways, I mean, the issue of education has been on the agenda for a very long time. There'll be people in this room who've done and nothing else but to push the agenda of education. I think what we've realized more and more is that it's really the quality of education we're talking about, and that's where it also moves on to, if we want to take that conversation there, the issue of violent extremism, etc. What are we educating? Who are educating our children? Quality of teachers, quality of schools, facilities, etc. But most, the content of education becomes important, and related to that, which was mentioned in the introduction here, is also what do we do with our education? Where does education take us? You see, one of the challenges, of course, and one of the factors of recruitment to violent extremism is joblessness. People without seeing hope. They might be well educated, but what do they do with their education? So I think, I'm a firm believer that education in itself is a right and it's a smart thing to do. But combined with that, you must have jobs create those skills in education that will transform into jobs.
What you said is so important because, that also is a factor in the incentive for families that have not yet put their children through school to want to send them to school, which therefore means that the reform of economies has to be the balancing side of the balance sheet. So there's the whole demand side where we're making sure that, at the supply side where we're making sure that we're providing the right kinds of skills and training people. But there's the demand side. If economies are not rapidly expanding, and that's why I was talking a lot about the new economic state that we're entering into. A lot of people, each time the world has to embrace a new revolution, get scared. But we've seen that with each revolution, what has been necessary has been to adapt the skills of the people to be able to operate with it. So agrarian revolution, what's going to happen? And then, industrial revolution, oh my God. And then, ICT revolution, which is the first revolution that African countries are fully participating in. People thought, the jobs are going to be gone. No, it simply redefined the kind of way that humanity is supposed to be productive. And so as we head into the fourth industrial revolution and economic structures have to change, we need to have visionaries in government. We need to have people who are prepared to question the status quo and to just get to the point where policies drive the kinds of changes and we're not trailing behind and, this whole thing is going off. The robotics cannot replace humanity.
Henrik, you are asked to comment on something.
Thank you, Aslak. First, I just wanted to say that we did also a survey on what explained gender parity or lack of gender parity in education outcomes globally. And what we did find was quite surprising. It's not the capacity that determines whether or not girls are getting education at the same level as boys. GDP per capita income has no effect on gender parity. It's other factors, maybe you can call them convenience factors, that explain it the more. So then I wanted just to follow up on what Laila said about the content of education, because I do think that Africa is now in a position where it might use its demographic transition in order to reap the benefits of a large youth population. But it has to position itself in a way to make that happen. And it has some very significant challenges demographically. We're now there in sub-Saharan Africa, there are around 190 million young people between the ages of 15 and 24. In the next 20 years, that will increase from 190 million to 310 million. It's an increase of more than 60%. In Nigeria, it will increase from 35 to 60, an increase of more than 70%. Being able to provide not only education, but high quality education that makes a difference in people's lives, that make them qualified for a job in the modern economy is absolutely essential in order to reap that benefit.
Just before you comment, Oby, can I ask you one more thing about the statistics of this worldwide? Because we have talking about education for girls now, and we show a large difference between countries and within countries. But I just want you to comment on this between genders. Is the gap between boys' education internationally and in a country as Nigeria more narrow than between girls? Is it a larger gap, or would you find the same gap in boys' education in Nigeria or the other countries?
That's a very good question. We simply don't have the data in order to look at the differences in the social differences in education. What we do know, because the demographic health surveys are only serving women. So we have for the young women. And what surprised us was we looked at Nigeria, and the gap is not narrowing between the groups. No. It's actually widening. But we do see when we look at infant mortality, both in Nigeria and in other countries, that there are systematic differences, whether or not it's girls and boys. So there are these persistent systematic differences in several countries. But there are also the positive stories. There are also a lot of examples where we have been able to reduce inequalities over time.
So Oby, this tracks us back to Nigeria. We're talking about, of course, giving education, and you say that we have the tools, but we need to use them. We need missionary leadership. We need to actually use the tools we know work, whether it's against religious, cultural, class, social, economical differences that creates this gap or actual lack of education. But then Laila and Henrik and you, all of you comment on the question of quality of education and what you educate for. And I was wondering if you could say something about this, because Nigeria, as you mentioned in your address, on the one side, Nigeria is providing doctors to the US. No country in the world exports as many medical doctors to the US as Nigeria does. And you find the Nigerian doctor all over the world, and it's done to the UK as well. It's been a brain drain or an export of educated people, intellectuals, authors, doctors, and so on. On the other side, the Nigerian university system seems to be under a continuous stress from lack of funding, lack of building, strikes, continuous strikes, and all these troublesome situations. And you have the question of the places where girls get education, like in Igbo Yoruba communities. What kind of jobs can they aspire to within Nigeria today? Is the infrastructure, the framework for doing what you want, creating a human resource-based economy, is it there yet on a national level, also in the areas where people get education?
So, thank you. And that brings the point of Leila, that the leadership for education cannot be the responsibility of the Minister of Education alone. Because if education is seen as the new economy, then it means it needs to be integrated into all the sources of growth in any society. The potential sources of growth can very much determine the content of the education that is being made available to people. More and more we see that innovative streams of education delivery don't have to reflect the traditional modes. So you can have the kinds of fast education that hands over skills to be able to participate in economic activity, while of course leaving the option to then do more traditional streams of earning a full degree. So technical, vocational, entrepreneurship, innovation, education, curriculum have become part of the ways of addressing the issue. And, looking even in terms of the labor profile, the labor market, and understanding what the needs are and what the obstacles are, become part of the policy responses to support the idea of quality jobs. And then, ensuring that with our eyes on the data, Nigeria has to generate annually 3 to 4 million jobs. Because 3 to 4 million young people join the labor market every year. Only 10% can be absorbed because the economy is not rapidly expanding as much as the demography is. So there is a disconnect there. And the only way to approach that kind of a gargantuan problem is to be radical in what the options can be. You can't be, the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. You don't have the time for that. You really don't. Because if we spend so much time navel gazing about this, then more Northeast will happen. These are young people who, not having a stake in society, simply would say to any extremist, perhaps some of the extremists are not driven by poverty. So we know clearly that there are the leaders of extremism are not driven, they are not poor. It's not because of poverty that they want to blow up themselves and blow up others. But their recruitment usually is a function of people feeling a sense of exclusion from society. And so we must address poverty as a driver in the recruitment of the disciples of those who want to harm society. And so what it means is we have to be quick. We have to be quick in realigning economic policy and building institutions that ensure that equity, we don't lose sight of it. So these data that show us the disparities have to be part of the conversation. I mean, some of what happens and you come to Nigeria a lot, so you know some of our the politics that goes on in our country. The country has had military heads of state and then a few civilian presidents. The northern part of the country has produced more of the people that led Nigeria one time or the other. But it has not translated to the kinds of outcomes that you would even find in the southern part of the country. Data that shows all of these kinds of issues can change the conversation in conflict-prone environments so that people suddenly find common vision on the basis of which to jointly build their nation, rather than allow some of these matters of ethnic and religious rivalry to be the divides that pull nations apart. And that's the kind of role that data plays in showing us what's driving, what factor is driving what. And my final point is the big agenda remains good governance. You can have effective education system. You can have economies that function and produce prosperity for everyone. You can have stable societies without good governance. So good governance all the way. Thank you.
Short from Laila.
Sure. You mentioned good governance, and I think Sustainable Development Goal 16, includes good governance. And that's why one of the important things is to include governments in our conversations on this. It's the government's responsibility to provide education for its people. And in this country, we take that for granted, maybe, although we have a discussion here as well. But that it's free education from the government and provided by the government. Quality education is key. It's part of the good governance.
This is just the beginning of a big conversation, a conversation that is thankfully not only had in this room, but all over the world, and needs to be taken all over the world, about education, and particularly about educating the girl child. I have, as you said, Obi, been traveling to Nigeria for the past 10 years, and I want to ask you one final question, because seeing Nigeria and meeting particularly young people in Nigeria, my impression is that I meet a country with a vast talent, particularly amongst young women. A vast talent of educated, aspiring, and intellectually impressive girls and women. At the same time, one of the most famous Nigerians of today, Chimamanda Adichie, the author, said in her essay, Why We All Should Be Feminist, she says, we teach our children to aspire to what? We teach our girl children to aspire to marriage, while we teach our boy children to aspire to the world. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting perspective, and I see it every time I'm there. I'm seeing this conflict between the expectations for girls that marriage is the final conclusion for your life and your education is just something you have on the side, and these girls' aspiration and want to create a new Nigeria, to actually have impact on the society, to change it, to do what you are asking, the things you are actually addressing in your talk. So my question to you is, for a country as Nigeria to utilize its female talent, does it need to be a female president?
The future is female.
Thank you.
Obi for president.
That's the shortest answer for today. I will make no more comments. Henrik, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, and I think it's a good note to end that, and we will be in touch, and I hope that we will have a chance to also sort of engage with you in the future. I think it's extremely powerful, and it's a great source of inspiration to hear you and to hear your perspectives, and I'm sure that Nigeria, with its human and natural resources, will become the state and the nation that it sort of deserves to, and that it can aspire to. And I do hope that you will be involved in that transformation in one way or another. I've tried to persuade you to run for president, but we'll see how that goes. I thank you all to the panelists. Thank you all for being with us this far. There will be a reception afterwards, so don't leave us, don't run away right away. I would like to give our speakers and contributors a small token of appreciation. First to Laila and Aslak. Thank you so much for coming and for your contributions. And of course, thank you so much to Obi, our guest of honor, for coming. We know that you're traveling a lot, so this is your carry-on luggage from now. This is a PRIO print that we are giving only to very special guests. And I have to look at it's a print by Trond Nordahl, and it's giving to all the Papa lecturers. We do have a version here that is sort of covered up for you. You can either bring it with you or we can ship it to you. We can talk about that later. But thank you so much for coming and for your very inspirational talk. And all the best for you and for Nigeria in the future.